thought it'd be a good opportunity to get in front of the people.
Have you ever seen the inside of the dome before?
Never have. It scares them. It's a big place, man, you know.
It was supposed to be another night of music, lights, and cheers. The crowd was alive, the band was ready, and Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, was at the height of his fame. But in the middle of the show, something happened that no one expected. A cruel voice shouted from the crowd, bringing the music to a sudden stop. What Elvis did next shocked everyone and became one of the most powerful moments in music history. A moment that proved courage can echo louder than any song. The night everything stopped. The night began like magic. The lights of the concert hall glowed as if the stars had fallen to earth. Thousands of people had come from far and near, eager to see the man they called the King. The air was warm with excitement, and every seat in the building was filled with cheering voices. When Elvis walked onto the stage, the crowd roared like thunder. The sound of his name rolled through the hall again and again. It was more than a concert that night. It felt like a celebration, a gathering of hearts that had come together for one reason: to feel the music. Elvis smiled as the band began to play. The sound of the guitar, the rhythm of the drums, and his smooth voice wrapped the audience in joy. People clapped, sang, and swayed to the beat. Every song carried energy that lifted the room higher and higher. He moved with ease, his presence lighting up the stage. To many, it felt like he wasn't just performing. He was speaking to every soul in the room. His music didn't care about who you were or where you came from. It was for everyone. For a while, everything was perfect. The music was alive, the crowd was happy, and Elvis was lost in his performance. But just as the song reached its highest point, something ugly broke through the sound. From the middle of the cheering crowd, a single voice shouted something harsh, something hateful. The words were sharp enough to cut through the joy in the room. The band froze, unsure of what had just happened. The laughter faded. Even the lights seemed dimmer. Elvis stopped singing, his hand lowered from the microphone as silence spread across the hall. Every eye turned toward him. The music that had brought everyone together suddenly disappeared, replaced by heavy quiet. No one moved. The man who had been dancing a moment ago now stood completely still. The joy that filled the air moments earlier was gone, replaced by confusion and surprise. People looked at each other, wondering if they had heard it right. Elvis didn't speak right away. He looked around the hall, his eyes steady but calm. You could feel the weight of the moment, like time itself had paused to see what he would do. Everyone waited. They knew Elvis was more than a singer. He was someone who cared deeply for the people who shared his stage and his heart. Slowly, he stepped forward. The silence was almost painful. The crowd held its breath, waiting for his voice again. In that stillness, it felt like the world was watching. What he would do next would decide what kind of man he truly was. That night was supposed to be another show in a long list of legendary performances. But after that moment, it became something much bigger. It became the night when the king of rock and roll faced hate right in front of him, not with anger, but with courage. No one could have known that one cruel voice in the crowd would stop everything. But sometimes it takes just one moment to show who a person really is. The stage that once held only music was now holding a lesson the world would never forget. Elvis didn't just stop singing, he stopped time. And as the crowd waited in silence, hearts pounding, they all wondered, what would the king do next? The slur that shattered the music. The room stayed silent, heavy with confusion and disbelief. Moments earlier, the crowd had been dancing and shouting with joy, but now every sound had vanished. Only one cruel voice had broken the music, and it was enough to freeze thousands. The words that had been shouted from somewhere deep in the crowd weren't just rude. They carried something darker. It was a hateful remark aimed at one of the black musicians on stage, a man who had been playing his heart out beside Elvis. The insult hung in the air, ugly and heavy, like smoke that refused to fade. Elvis's eyes searched the crowd. His face didn't show anger right away, but something inside him changed. Everyone could see it. The sparkle in his eyes dimmed, replaced by a calm that felt too strong to ignore. His fingers, which had been tapping to the rhythm only moments before, stopped completely. The band waited quietly, unsure of what to do. No one dared to play another note. For a few long seconds, it felt like time had stopped inside that hall. You could almost hear hearts beating, people holding their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. The fans who had come to celebrate music now sat frozen, realizing that the night had taken a turn they never expected. Elvis took a slow breath. The crowd's eyes were fixed on him. He looked toward his band, his friends who had shared every song, every laugh, every journey with him. He knew the pain behind the insult wasn't new. The world was still filled with people who saw others as less because of the color of their skin. But not here, not in his show, not under his stage lights. He placed his microphone down for a moment, walked a few steps across the stage, and looked toward the crowd. His face was calm, but his silence spoke louder than any song. Every person could feel the tension rising, the weight of his thoughts filling the air. When he finally lifted the microphone again, his voice wasn't angry or loud. It was steady and clear, the kind of voice that made everyone listen. At that moment, Elvis didn't care about fame or headlines. He cared about respect. He wanted every person in that hall to remember that his music came from a place where people of every color and every voice mattered. The songs he sang, the moves he made, even the rhythm of his band all came from the deep roots of black culture that had shaped him since childhood. He knew where his sound came from the church songs he had heard as a boy, from the blues singers who poured their pain into their voices, from the gospel choirs that lifted their hearts in joy. Those sounds had built him, and he never forgot it. That was why the insult hit so deeply. It wasn't just an attack on a man and his band. It was an attack on the very soul of his music. Elvis looked around again and told the crowd, through his expression and his words, that his stage was no place for hate. He wanted everyone there to know that his music stood for love, not division. The crowd began to realize the strength behind his calmness. They could feel his message, even if he didn't shout it. His silence turned into power. His calm became command, and soon, the people who had been quiet started to cheer again, not for a song, but for his courage. The man who had shouted the insult shrank into the shadows, drowned by the rising voices of those who stood for unity. Elvis had turned a moment of shame into a lesson that would live far beyond that night. The music that had been broken by hate was now repaired by respect. Slowly, Elvis turned to his band, nodded softly, and the music began again. The sound filled the hall like light breaking through darkness. It was no longer just a concert, it was a moment of healing. The crowd felt the difference in every beat. They sang louder, clapped harder, and their cheers carried something pure, something that said love would always win. That single moment became a story passed from person to person. A reminder of how one act of courage could silence hate. Elvis had stopped the show for something greater than applause. He stopped it to remind the world that music is meant to bring people together, not tear them apart. As the last note of that song faded and the cheers grew louder, Elvis looked out into the sea of faces, young and old, black and white, all united once more. He smiled, not as a performer, but as a man who had stood for what was right. That night didn't just change a concert, it changed a legacy. And what happened next would prove that Elvis's stand was only the beginning. Because when he finally spoke to the crowd again, his words would echo far beyond that stage, leaving the world stunned by what he did next. Elvis's powerful reaction. The silence after the song ended was unlike anything the crowd had ever felt before. It wasn't the usual pause before applause or the calm that comes after a loud cheer. It was deeper, heavier, almost alive. Thousands of people sat still, their eyes locked on the man standing in the middle of the stage. Elvis didn't move for a few seconds. He just stood there, breathing slowly, as if weighing every thought before speaking. The lights shone down on him, casting a glow that made him look both powerful and human at the same time. His band watched him closely. Some of them looked down at their instruments, uncomfortable and unsure. Others stared into the crowd, searching for the face of the person who had shouted those hateful words. The moment had broken something sacred, the joy that music brings when it unites people. Everyone could feel it. Elvis finally lifted the microphone again. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't shout. He didn't curse. He spoke with a calm strength that pulled every ear toward him. You could hear the pain in his tone, but you could also hear the fire. A deep fire that came from years of seeing unfairness, of watching people he loved treated differently because of the color of their skin. He looked out across the audience, his gaze moving from one section to another, making sure everyone understood that this wasn't just a small issue. This was something bigger. The crowd could sense that something important was about to happen. He began by reminding them why they were all there, not for anger, not for hate, but for music. He told them that the songs they were enjoying came from many hearts, many stories, and many voices. He wanted them to remember that the rhythm of his music had roots that stretched far beyond him into the deep soul of the black musicians who had shaped the sound of America long before he ever sang a note. The crowd listened in complete silence. There were no whispers, no shuffling, no camera flashes. Every person felt the weight of his words. Some were ashamed, realizing how easily people could forget the truth behind the music they loved. Others felt proud, grateful that Elvis had chosen to speak up instead of ignoring what had happened. Elvis pointed gently toward his band, toward the talented men who had stood by him night after night, creating the magic that filled those halls. He spoke about how every note, every harmony, every beat they played came from a shared love of music, not from color or background. His eyes softened when he looked at them, and a small smile flickered across his face. It was his way of saying, "I've got your back." For a few moments, he spoke about his childhood, how he had grown up surrounded by gospel singers, how he used to stand outside small churches listening to the music that poured through open doors. Those sounds had shaped him long before fame ever found him. They taught him about hope, struggle, and faith, and he wanted everyone in that room to know that those same voices, the voices of black artists, the hands that played the blues, the spirits that built rock and roll, were the heart of what made him who he was. The crowd began to stir, a few people clapping softly at first, then louder as they realized what he was saying. It wasn't just a speech, it was a truth that had been waiting to be said in front of thousands. Elvis wasn't preaching. He was reminding them of something simple, something everyone should already know: respect. He then turned his gaze back toward the direction of the insult. His voice grew stronger, firmer. Without raising it, he made his point clear: there was no room for hate in his world. Not in his audience, not in his band, not in his music. Anyone who came to his show had to leave their prejudice at the door. Music was meant to bring people together, not tear them apart. A wave of applause rose, hesitant at first, then massive. It grew until the sound filled the hall again, louder than the insult that had silenced it. People stood up, cheering, clapping, shouting his name. Some even cried, moved by the power of his words. It was no longer just a concert, it was a moment of truth. Elvis smiled gently, but there was still sadness in his eyes. He knew that this wouldn't end racism overnight, but he also knew that change starts with moments like these, moments when someone decides to stand up, even when it's easier to stay silent. He gave the crowd a nod, the kind of nod that said, "We're better than this." Then, turning back to his band, he gave a small signal. The drummer lifted his sticks, the guitarist adjusted his strap, and slowly the music began again, soft at first, then stronger. The rhythm carried warmth, the kind that heals. Elvis began to sing, his voice full of emotion. Every word sounded deeper, every note carried more meaning than before. The audience joined in, clapping to the beat, singing along, shouting words of support. The hate that had broken the moment was gone, washed away by a flood of unity. For those who were there, it was a night they would never forget, the night they saw a man stop everything, take a stand, and bring the light back into the room. Behind the stage, when the concert ended, Elvis didn't talk much. He walked to his dressing room quietly, but the band followed him, their faces filled with gratitude. They didn't need to say much either. The look in their eyes said it all. Elvis had done something few people dared to do in those times. He had chosen love over fear. Later, as he sat alone for a moment, he thought about what had happened. He knew that the world outside the concert hall was still divided. He knew that one night couldn't change everything. But he also knew that the story of what he did would travel. People would talk, newspapers would write, others would think twice before spreading hate in the name of ignorance. That thought gave him peace. When he walked out to greet a few fans waiting by the stage door, he saw faces of every kind, young, old, black, white, all smiling and thanking him. That was the power of what had just happened. Music had done what it was always meant to do, to bring people together again. That night, Elvis didn't just earn applause, he earned respect. The kind that lasts longer than any song. And as the story of that night began to spread, something remarkable started to happen. People who had never cared about equality before started to see things differently. One man's courage had started a ripple, and that ripple was only just beginning. Because what Elvis did next after the show, behind the scenes, would show the world that his words weren't just for the spotlight. They were a promise he intended to keep, defending what he believed in. When the music faded that night and the lights dimmed, many thought the show was over. But for Elvis, it had only just begun. What happened on that stage wasn't just a reaction, it was the start of something deeper. He had spoken from his heart in front of thousands. But what came after showed that his words weren't meant only for that moment. They were part of who he was. Backstage, the air was quiet. His band members, still shaken by the insult, tried to go about their routine, wiping their instruments, folding their jackets, taking small breaths to calm down. But the mood was heavy. The hurt lingered like a shadow, especially among the black musicians who had faced this kind of pain more times than they could count. For them, it was nothing new. But for Elvis, it was personal now. He had seen it with his own eyes, right in the middle of a space that was supposed to be about joy and unity. Elvis walked into the dressing room and looked at his team. No one spoke for a moment. Then he placed a hand on the shoulder of the man who had been targeted. His touch was gentle, but his face showed strength, a silent promise that what had happened would not be ignored. Everyone in the room could feel his sincerity. He told his band that they were not just musicians playing songs together, they were a family. And families stand up for each other. He reminded them that what they created on stage was something pure, something that belonged to all of them. Every sound, every beat, every performance came from shared love and respect. He wanted them to know that he would never allow hate to have a place in that space again. The man who had been insulted looked at Elvis quietly, emotion filling his eyes. He knew that Elvis didn't have to say anything, but he had. And more than that, he had acted. In a time when many stayed silent out of fear or pride, Elvis had chosen to speak when it mattered. In the days that followed, stories about that concert began to spread. Some people praised him, saying it was one of the bravest moments of his career. Others were surprised and shocked that a man as famous as Elvis would risk his image by speaking up about race. But Elvis didn't care about what people thought. He cared about doing what was right. He had grown up poor in the South, surrounded by the same divide that had kept communities apart for generations. But as a boy, he had never seen music through the lens of color. He had listened to voices that made him feel alive, no matter who sang them. Gospel, blues, rhythm, they were all a part of him. The idea that someone could insult a man for being black, especially one who shared the same passion for music, went against everything he believed in. Elvis began using his platform in quiet but powerful ways. He made sure that the musicians who played with him, no matter their race, were treated equally and paid fairly. When promoters tried to separate audiences or discourage black performers from joining his shows, he refused. He made it clear that if they wanted Elvis Presley, they had to accept everyone who stood beside him. This wasn't just talk, he lived it. During tours, he would share meals, travel, and laugh with his entire band. He didn't believe in keeping distance or pretending differences mattered. To him, music erased all lines. It was the universal language that everyone could understand. And while he rarely made political statements, his actions spoke louder than any speech. When reporters asked him about his choice of musicians, he simply said he played with the best, and that was all that mattered. Those few words carried truth that could not be denied. That concert had opened his eyes even wider to the reality of the world around him. He saw how people he loved had to fight battles that he never had to face. It stirred something deep inside him, not anger, but a quiet determination to use his fame for good. He didn't see himself as a hero. He saw himself as someone trying to make things right in the small ways he could. The moment that once threatened to ruin a night had become a symbol of strength. People began to write letters to Elvis, thanking him for what he did. Families who had faced discrimination found hope in his stand. Musicians who once feared rejection found courage knowing that someone as powerful as the king had their back. Even within his team, something had changed. His musicians walked taller. The bond they shared grew stronger. Each performance after that night carried a little more soul, a little more unity. Every time they stepped on stage, it was a reminder of what they had overcome together. And though the world outside still had much to learn, he had shown that change could start anywhere, even in the middle of a concert. That night, he had chosen courage over comfort, love over fear, and respect over silence. He didn't plan it, he didn't rehearse it. It came from the heart, and that's why it mattered. What Elvis did after that night became a story people would tell for years. But the truth was, he didn't do it for fame or praise. He did it because it was right. Because deep down he believed that the heart of music, the real soul of it, belonged to everyone. And as his next concert approached, the world waited eagerly to see how he would follow such a powerful moment. They didn't know it yet, but the next show would bring something even more extraordinary, a moment that would make headlines, shake minds, and prove once again that Elvis Presley was more than a performer. He was a man who believed that love in all its colors was worth fighting for. The world responds. News of that night spread faster than anyone expected. Within days, newspapers carried stories about what Elvis had done. Some called it one of the boldest things ever seen on stage. Others described it as a moment that changed how people saw the king of rock and roll. The headlines didn't just focus on his music this time, they talked about his heart, his courage, and his voice beyond the songs. In towns across America, people began talking about it. Some were shocked that a man of his fame would take such a public stand. Others were proud, saying he had done what few had the bravery to do, to speak against hate in front of thousands. For fans who had loved him for years, this made them love him even more. And for those who had doubted him, it made them see him in a new light. Letters started to arrive at his home and his management office, hundreds of them. People wrote about how they had been moved to tears hearing what happened. Parents told stories of how they shared the moment with their children, teaching them that respect and kindness should always come first. Musicians from different backgrounds thanked him for defending what they had lived through for so long. Each letter carried a piece of gratitude, a reminder that his words had reached far beyond the concert walls. Not everyone supported him, though. There were some who felt that he should have stayed quiet, that music should not mix with issues, but Elvis never believed that. To him, music had always been about truth. It had come from struggle and hope. It was born from the cries, laughter, and dreams of people who wanted to be heard. So he didn't respond to the critics. He simply kept doing what he loved, making music that brought people together. As he performed in new cities, fans began to notice something different. His concerts now carried a new energy, not just excitement, but purpose. Each time he sang, it felt like he was singing for something bigger than fame. He smiled more at his bandmates, gave them longer moments to shine, and introduced them proudly to the audience. People saw the unity on stage and felt it in their hearts. Television shows and magazines began retelling the story. They called it "The Night Elvis Stopped the Music for Something That Mattered." It became a symbol of courage in a time when speaking out wasn't easy. And even though Elvis never bragged about it, the story grew on its own, spreading from person to person, from one generation to another. That moment changed not just his image, but also the way many people saw music. It showed that a simple act of standing up, could leave a mark that lasted longer than any hit song. When reporters later asked him why he had done it, Elvis smiled softly and said it was the only thing his heart allowed him to do. Those who heard those words knew that the king hadn't just sung about love, he had lived it. And while the cheers from that night slowly faded into history, the message remained: that kindness has power, that unity can be louder than hate, and that one voice, when used for good, can echo far beyond the stage. But the most powerful part of this story wasn't what the world said about him. It was what Elvis did next. Because his actions after that moment proved that his courage wasn't just for one night. It was the beginning of a lasting change, the moment that changed history. That night didn't just end with applause, it began a ripple that spread across the world. What Elvis did became more than a story. It became a symbol of strength, kindness, and unity. He had turned a hateful moment into one of hope, reminding everyone that true greatness isn't measured by fame but by courage. In the years that followed, many artists spoke of how his bravery inspired them to use their voices too. He had shown that standing up for what's right could be done with grace, not anger. People remembered that one concert as the night the king didn't just perform, he led. Historians later said that his actions quietly shaped how artists handled injustice on and off stage. Elvis proved that even in a divided time, music could still bring hearts together. It was never planned, never rehearsed, yet it became one of the defining moments of his life, a moment when a man who sang of love decided to live it fully before the world. And though decades have passed, that night still echoes the night Elvis stopped the music and in doing so, changed history forever. That night, Elvis didn't just stop a concert, he stopped hate in its tracks. His calm strength, his words, and his actions became a lesson that still speaks to the world today. He showed that music isn't just about rhythm or fame, it's about unity, heart, and standing up for what's right. Years have passed, but that moment still reminds us that kindness will always be stronger than cruelty, and love will always rise above fear. What do you think about Elvis's unforgettable stand that changed history? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell.